Hello and welcome to Debra and Peter are doing a podcast from the West Country and the not quite so West Country, but still west of London. Go west. How are you doing, Debra?
I'm all right, thanks, Peter. A bit, disappointed with the weather today because it's very cloudy and gloomy. And when I had check-in with my team this morning, they all looked a bit glum. And we decided it was the fact that the weather was a bit cloudy that made them dumb. Glum. They're not dumb. I want on the record, my team is not dumb. They're all super bright and very talented. And how's the weather down your way?
Well, I'm glad it's a little bit cooler today because we've got the three cats in the house, not yet able to go outside. I think the advice is you need to give them a couple of weeks to acclimatise. So we have to put them in bits of the house where the windows and doors can be shut, and then have gradually been sort of liberating them. But it's meant we've been in the heat lugging all these kind of boxes about and all the rest of it. And actually, even as we speak, we have Mr. Glazier Man here, highly recommended by a friend of mine down here, to put a pane of glass in that has a cat flap in it, and then we will be seeing how they get on with the wildlife down here. I think we've been used to a collection of really interesting gifts of wildlife of one form or another brought to us from the Kent countryside, and who knows what we're going to get down here. Give the rabbits a run for their money.
Oh, well, I hope they're safe and happy. I'm sure they will be. So what have you been up to?
I am immediately after we do this, I am off on the train up to London, then across to Brussels for a get together with nearly all, if not all, the staff of the Five Rights Foundation. So I was going to ask your advice, actually, Debra, because I'll be the only one there. This will be the team. It's their away days, if you like, and they're coming from all sorts of interesting locations, seeing one another, thinking about the big issues that are facing the charity. And I'm sort of there to participate or listen in. And so there's a sort of big question there about how do I demonstrate that I am a member of the team and we're all on the same side, but at the same time be absolutely clear that the role of the trustee is distinctly different from the role of the executive officers. So have you got any
tips,
hints and tips for how I should present myself? Because there may be a sort of, especially because I'm new, there may be a bit of a sort of default to thinking that I'm somehow or other in charge. And as the chair, in one way you are, but in so many other ways you're not.
You're not, yeah. Well, okay. So a couple of things that spring immediately to mind. The first thing is that regardless of your best intent, you're not one of them. And you also hold a position of enormous power as the chair of the board. They will not forget that, even if you do. So what that means is there will be a degree of constraint around you, no matter how engaging and charming and gorgeous you are, which you are, Peter, and how down to earth and how natural. They will never forget that you are the chair of the board. So you've got to remember that there'll be a little bit of constraint around you. That's the first thing. The second thing is to remember, not to be the hippo. You know the hippo, don't you? The highest paid person's opinion.
Oh no!
So it's called a hippo because what happens is if you're in a position of authority and power or perceived status, the tendency is that people will give more weight to what you say than necessarily you would. Yeah. So this happened to me at DSC when I first came. The publishing team would come and show me the marketing would show me the covers they designed for various books and ask my opinion. And I hadn't yet got used to the fact that my opinion was taken as gospel. So I would say, oh, I really like it, or I'm not so keen. And then what they would do, they would spend like forever trying to convince me that I was wrong and this design was right. And I had suddenly realised, look. And I said to them, look, if you ask me for my opinion, I'm going to give it to you, but it's your decision, not mine. So if you don't want me to say what I really think, don't ask me. I trust you. You do what you think is best. And so then they stopped asking me about the design of the book covers, which is good for everybody, so I wasn't tempted to get involved. But I'd forgotten, you see, that they took me seriously as a chief executive when I was just giving my opinion as a, member of our team. So that's what you've got to be super careful of. Is there any opinion you make will be taken as completely serious. And then you sort of said it yourself. I think the best thing to do is just listen, because with the best will in the world, you simply are not part of that team in the way that they are. In fact, maybe the best way is to like visualize yourself as you're kind of like the supporter of the team rather than part of the team.
Yes.
So your job is to listen and to learn, and then to take that back to the board to think about what can the board do to support the staff. Something like that, I suggest.
That'll take quite a lot of discipline, won't it? Because I kind of feel a sort of sense of people will have an expectation. Well,
they will.
He's the new chair. What's his vision for the next chapter of this? Where's he going to take us? And if I just sit there quietly and don't offer any views, that feels a problem. But I do. Funnily enough, I dug out. We've talked quite a lot about the battle on the board.
Yes.
There's this book here by Debra and Peter. It's tough at the top, and I remembered writing in the back of your book. There are tips from different leaders in the sector.
And you're one of them.
Yes, and one of the things that I said back then was, the acquisition of greater authority doesn't automatically make you wiser and worth listening to. Leadership does not equal you deciding the outcome of every dispute and discussion. It's far better to create an environment in which many others can do that for themselves with confidence.
And that's exactly it. So you're giving yourself your own advice.
Yeah.
I mean, because they're bound to want you to say something. And I think that, at the beginning, perhaps what you frame why you're there. I'm here to learn. This is what I'm here to do. I'm not here to make decisions or to tell you what to do or to, anything like that. What I want to do is to listen and to learn. And I will take what I hear from you today, and then we will talk as a board about the longer term vision of the organisation, how we implement it based on what I've heard today. And then if you frame it like that at the beginning, nobody's going to expect you to articulate a vision or a direction, which you shouldn't be doing anyway.
No.
As the chair, you need the support of your board to do it. So if you frame it like that, so you can be your normal, friendly, gorgeous self, Peter, but just try ever so hard not to give an opinion.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to a time when I worked at the Department for Education, and Andrew Adonis was Tony Blair's education advisor.
Yeah.
And the Secretary of State at the time was Charles Clarke, and Andrew Adonis became an extremely successful and powerful minister and was a driving force behind the Academies programme. But at this time he was a advisor in Number 10, but Charles Clarke always called him Tony's office, because people would always say, Tony's office wants this, Tony's office wants that. And he was clearly a big kind of force who you needed to influence. But he would come along to our meetings and he would sit there and say absolutely nothing. And it was quite unnerving because he held all this power. And yet, if he was asked to say anything, he would say, I'm in deep listening mode. and you sort of thought, well, I do respect that. And it's good that you are listening, and I can almost hear myself over the next couple of days saying I'm in deep listening mode. But there's something that didn't quite resonate, because he was in deep listening mode there, but then went off, and you sort of felt
he hadn't listened.
He'd really listened, but he'd interpreted and drawn his own conclusions. But they were his conclusions for the Prime Minister rather than our shared conclusions and appreciation of one another. And I say that with the greatest respect to Andrew Adonis, because he was a brilliant contributor to what we were doing. But you just sort of felt that tension by someone sort of sitting there and making a virtue of saying, I'm only listening.
But Peter, the thing is, you're not scary looking, whereas I think Andrew Adonis, with forgiveness, please forgive me, Andrew Adonis, but he is quite an intimidating looking person. You have a lovely, friendly face. And, we were joking at the beginning, but you smile a lot. And I don't think, even if you're listening, it will come across as if it's like a threatening presence. Not that I'm saying he was a threatening presence, but you see what I'm saying? So I think just being your natural self, but just try not to give any opinions. So, ask a question, that's really interesting. Tell me more about that. That's all okay. But just try not to offer what you think the thing is, because people will take that terribly seriously.
Yeah, okay. No, that's really helpful. That's good advice. And it's interesting what you say about the sort of power plays and what people look and sound and behave like, and the judgments people make about how people look and how they show up. I think I've said this before on the podcast, but when I did media training quite early on, I was told you have a natural charm. So which is a nice thing for television interviews and radio interviews and this sort of thing. And you almost wonder, how can people do interviews if they're not being charming? But at the same time, I've had feedback, through my career about, being sufficiently, and women get this a lot. So being sufficiently assertive and
gravitas.
Determined.
That's what I was always told. You've got no gravitas, Deborah. Yeah.
Yes, not in a. Someone said to me once, you need to have more bottom.
That's the last thing I need is more bottom, let's be honest. I could do with rather less of it. Anyway, that's a whole different podcast. But yeah, it's interesting actually, because you talking about that, how you come across, makes me think of the thing that struck me this week was the President Zelensky's second visit to the White House. Yeah. And I don't know if you recall, Peter, I'm sure you do, and listeners may recall that in the first meeting, which was awful, somebody, it might have even been the vice president, accused Zelensky of not respecting the office of the president because he wasn't wearing a suit and a tie. And this became a big deal. And I think we may have even chatted about it at the time on the podcast. We've done so many now, Peter, I can't remember, and I'm sure our listeners can't either. But anyway, but it really struck me that the images of him yesterday showed Zelensky very much not in a suit, I have to say. But he was he was wearing quite a thick jacket and very dark. So he looked slightly smarter than he did in his combats. And I can remember at the time when he was asked when would he get out of his combat fatigues, he said, when the war is over. And of course, the war isn't over. But I was just thinking about, how part of me really wanted Zelensky to say, stuff you, Trump and Vance, and turn up in his combats, preferably with, a bit of a blood on his cheek or something, just to make a point. But on the other hand, I also understood that, as leaders, sometimes you have to do things that go a little bit against the grain, because this visual message that you're giving to the person you're trying to win over matters so much. And funny enough, we were talking about it in our check-in this morning about, clothing and, suits and not suits and all that sort of stuff. And I was talking about you, Peter, and saying how now you tend to wear very colourful, very bright, very interesting clothes and shoes and things like that, which you probably didn't wear in your, ascent up the civil service. You probably were. In fact, I've seen photos of you in, very civil servant-y attire, perhaps the odd bright tie. And I was saying that there's something about those of us who are in a position of power and privilege, like you and I in particular, we're at the end of our careers, really. I mean, I don't mean we're at the end of our useful lives. Of course we're not. Please God in heaven, we've got plenty left. But we're not having to prove ourselves in the way that we did when we were younger, in the way in which younger people work in the way up the career ladder might need to. And also how much lots of people are forced into behaving or appearing in ways that are against what they would like to do simply because they're vulnerable and they're not in positions of power. Anyway, it just really struck me. And I think on balance, what he did was the right thing to do. And it was like a beautiful compromise. He was not, by no means was he in a suit and a tie. But on the other hand, he had clearly dressed up. Anyway, I don't know what you thought about that. Yeah, it just really struck me.
It was a journalist that accused him of not dressing properly. And he turned it around really nicely by observing that the journalist was still wearing the same old suit, whereas Zelensky had changed. Now, I thought it was clever because he didn't need to compromise the essence of his messages, but also illustrated in a kind of costless way that he had heard. So if you're going to concede something, why not?
It's the easiest thing to
something
concede,
which is
it?
Sort of superficial. Although, it did mean Donald Trump didn't change his clothes and doesn't change anything for anyone, and so it's who's got the power in that situation. Funnily enough, when I started in the civil service right back at the beginning, which actually was on the 18th of August, so it's a special day for me, the 18th of August. I remember that was my first day in kind of full-time civil service employment, so 39 years ago this week. I wore cardigans, quite colourful cardigans.
Good Lord, Peter.
I know, extraordinary, which lasted for about 2 weeks, and then most other people had suits. And when I got onto the fast stream, I got myself a sort of suit like everyone else. But I always tried to be a little bit different. To wear colourful ties, or at the lottery. At lottery, I wore cufflinks quite a lot, and they were a thing. But I do. It's very much easier to kind of play around with your style when you have got permission to do it, and then you kind of create space for other people, don't you? So I do think it's important to be respectful of situations, but you don't know until you've got it wrong or someone observes it to you. I mean, first time round, Zelensky had no idea that they were going to make a big issue out of that, did he?
Yeah, it's difficult though, because I'm always torn about this sort of notion of what you wear and what you don't wear, because women are so judged by what we wear, by our clothing, in so many different respects. Like it's too short, we're showing too much cleavage, it's a bit too much boobage noticeable, the outfit's a bit too slim fitting, too much legs on display, or we don't look professional enough because we're wearing a colourful frock or something like that. And so women are hyper aware of clothing in particular, whereas men don't have the same challenge, because a man wears a suit, he wears a suit. But my line has always been like not to let your clothes get in the way of your message. So if you know that turning up to, I don't know, a meeting with a bank manager to talk about a loan for the charity in a t-shirt and jeans is probably not going to help you achieve your message, because you're not going to look as if you're competent and in control, then just wear the bloody suit. So my line has always been wear what's going to work in that particular scenario. And and I think that's what Zelensky's done. He's worn what's going to work in his particular scenario, hopefully work in his particular scenario. But it's a difficult one, because people do get very precious about, but my clothing is who I am. And I was like, no, it's not. You wouldn't wear a bikini to a funeral, and you wouldn't wear a suit to the beach. Your clothes are not who you are. They're just what you choose to wear in a particular time of day but it's interesting, because also people tend to expect leaders to dress slightly differently, and again, do we live up to that expectation, or do we break the mold?
Zelensky has made a thing of, as you say, he would wear his combats until the war was over, and then he didn't, or by wearing something over the top, he kind of kept his word, but illustrated that there was room for discussion, and that unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, that's the truth of the power dynamic between those two people. And I think that in so many issues which face as leaders, understanding the power dynamic and where to be completely principled and take a stand, and where to compromise or take a slightly kind of longer route through is the essence.
And also sometimes when to surprise. If people are expecting their new chief executive to turn up in a suit and a tie, and they turn up in a brightly coloured shirt and chinos, that also might be a very powerful message about, I am approachable, I am, somebody like that. So anyway, it just really struck me. And, I was torn between wanting to say, shove it, Trump, wear your combats, to actually that was a very astute, very clever compromise that Zelensky came up with. Clever man. Clever man. Actually, the other thing I wanted to talk to you about, Peter, so it's thinking about volunteers, of course, because, we care passionately about volunteers. They're hugely important. Well, we're called the voluntary sector. It's like volunteers are the beating heart of what we do. And even charities that don't employ staff have volunteers in the form of trustees. They're voluntary trustees. So no part of the sector is without it. But in our sector, we're regulated, aren't we, as charities, of course? So the way in which we behave and what we do and what we're allowed to do, and all the things that we have to do, like safeguarding, etc., is kind of taken as read. But I was struck by a story I read about a group of volunteer. Well, the press has labelled them volunteer vigilantes. I think they would not describe themselves as vigilantes, but it's a group in Bournemouth called Safe Force or something like that. And what they've decided to do, so they're ex-soldiers, bouncers and things like that, and they've decided to patrol the streets of Bournemouth, spotting people engaging in nefarious activities one way or the other. And there's been some controversy about it, certainly. I mean, the Dorset police are not endorsing it, because they're saying it's not regulated. Where's the safeguarding checks? How do you know that each one of those individual volunteers isn't a thug or a rapist, or someone using that in order to do nefarious things themselves? And I just wondered about, because of course, sector. You know, the NSPCC started as a group of volunteers coming together, deciding they wanted to do something about it before it became a formal charity. As do most charities, they begin with volunteers. But is there a point at which, you know, allowing people just to volunteer and do things like roaming the streets, you know, looking out for wrongdoers, is that actually, you know, when does self-organized efforts support the public, and when do they cross a line somewhere? So I was just really thinking about that.
So there were a couple of times at the NSPCC where I found it quite difficult, because there were groups of you might call them vigilantes, but self-organized people who were coming together and identifying adults online who were grooming and abusing children, and on the face of it doing a rather good job, a rather better job than the police were in terms of prioritizing these horrible crimes. And so they'd been quite successful. At the same time, there have also been high-profile cases in the past of terrible things going wrong, where vigilante groups have attacked paediatricians rather than paedophiles, and you can see where it all goes wrong. And and you sort of, I wanted, as the chief executive of the NSPCC, as a kind of kindred spirit to some of these people who really meant well and wanted the best for children, to sympathize with them, but you kind of absolutely couldn't, because they were not, however successful or effective their efforts, they were in danger of trampling across all sorts of official police investigations and inquiries of one another. And they didn't know what they didn't know. And it might be that the police were actually not involved at all, but it might be that they could have been. So there was a kind of rule that you just couldn't. You had to say, we won't tolerate, or while we respect the motives, we can't support these activities. But there's quite a lot, especially at the moment, when people are worried and upset about levels of shoplifting, about fare dodgers on the public transport and so on. You can see why people want to take these things into their own hands. And then when you can see crimes being committed in front of you and nothing apparently being done about them, that is when people sort of organize to deliver, don't they? But as you say, being organized to deliver in a regulated context is different from just literally taking the law into your own hands.
I think that's a really excellent point, actually, Peter. I think it's about encouraging people to do it properly rather than just to gather together. Because I think about, because as you know, there are a lot of people who have a real problem with asylum seekers and refugees in this country and think they shouldn't be here, and they're, committing crimes. And so they organise themselves, don't they, to go and stand outside the hotels and stuff like that. And I think there's such a fine line, because, we wouldn't think twice about a bunch of people who organise themselves to get together to clean up the litter in the woods. We'd think that was fine, wouldn't we? And good, right-minded citizens. But when it's dealing with something a bit more...
Yeah, protesting is a good thing, isn't it? And people will have strong opinions about all sorts of activities, and it's okay to express your views individually and collectively.
But protesting against the right people, so
who's deciding who the right people are? You and me.
Well, possibly, but I'm just saying, like, you protest against the decision makers, not the people at the end of. Do you see what I mean? So it's like, it's all very well going and shouting at an asylum hotel, but they don't have any influence over, what the government's approach to migration is. You need to protest outside your MP's office or whatever. And so I think there's, I don't know. It's difficult, isn't it? Because people should have the freedom to volunteer to get together to do the things that matter. But if you do that unfettered, that's when you end up with things going wrong. And I just have a horrible feeling something awful might happen in this case of the Bournemouth group. However well-meaning they are and however good their intent, the fact that there is no, there's no parameters around their behaviour. There's no, But it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because we want people to come together and volunteer. And most charities start that way,
Yeah, and raise the game and the focus of the statutory services onto the things which really matter to people.
Yeah.
And what better way to do that than by demonstrating what is possible, but Yeah, I've seen too many examples of these activities being
going wrong,
counterproductive, either in their own terms or cutting across what the statutory services are genuinely trying to do, but can't talk to you about in a public way.
Yeah, very difficult. So I shall watch with interest how it unfolds, whether they keep up the energy, and gather more volunteers to support them, or whether it sort of gently fizzles out. Because I'm pretty sure, I'm going to have to check my facts here, but I think Neighbourhood Watch is now formally registered, isn't it?
Yeah, I was going to ask about Neighbourhood Watch and what the difference is between what they're doing and what the Neighbourhood Watch would do.
Because of course Neighbourhood Watch used to be a big deal, didn't it? It was like we all had Neighbourhood Watches, but I don't think I've seen or heard anything about Neighbourhood Watch in years. Yeah, I don't know. We're going to have to find out. I'm just looking to see, Peter, so that we can answer the question now if it's possible. It's a registered charity. That's it. So that's the difference between Neighbourhood Watch and Watch. So it's still just crime prevention, but it's supported by the police and the home. So in other words, it's official. It's done properly. They're subject to proper checks, etc., etc., etc. So whereas this Bournemouth lot, so it sort of makes me think, why didn't they volunteer to join the Neighbourhood Watch?
Yeah.
Did they even know that it existed?
Yeah, or is it active in their area? The thing that would really get me to join a group and take the law into my own hands is the whole kind of fly tipping business. And I don't know what it's like around here, but certainly back where I was, horrendous littering of places and now is that and the neighbourhood would really want to do something about this, but no one seems interested enough. And if you want to get a bulk waste delivery organised by the council, there was a sort of 6 to 8 week backlog. So is it any wonder that some of these people take the law into their own hands and dump their rubbish down country lanes? But it's horrendous behaviour, and I don't know. I don't know whether it feels like the correct option is for the statutory service to organise collection of rubbish faster than they're currently doing, in the same way as it feels right for asylum seeker applications to be processed a whole lot faster than 420 days or whatever it is at the moment. But in the meantime, we have a situation where a public service is failing and lots of people feel the same way about it and want to do something about it together, and that is in some ways the essence of our sector.
I think that's very different to fly tipping, though, or even to going on violent protests against asylum seekers and refugees. I think that's entirely different, because so with fly tipping, okay, there's a problem with waste picking up, but I'm sorry, grown responsible adults do not dump their broken washing machines or their crappy old mattresses on the side of the road. So you write a letter, or you dump your mattress outside your MP's office or the local authority. You don't do it. And so I suspect that people who fly tip, it's got nothing at all to do with protesting against the state of waste management services and local authorities. Do with being bloody plain arse lazy, Peter.
Yes.
And if I'm offending anybody, I don't care. There are certain things that just the state does not have to. It's not okay to say, I only committed this crime because you didn't pick up my rubbish. It's like, well, I'm sorry, but if that's the excuse we're using, people can get away with committing all sorts of crimes. So that sort of thing, I down with that sort of thing, Peter.
That's a really good point. And probably some of these things you have to pay a modest charge to cover part of the cost of the service, and people are choosing not to do that. They're choosing to be lazy and irresponsible instead. So I think that's a very fair point.
Anyway, I suspect we've gone all over the place again, haven't we? Zelensky's, very clever attire. The cats roaming free in the countryside at some point. People can't say we don't skitter about, Peter. I'm sure they would say, is there any ever logic to these podcasts? And can I just say to listeners, the honest truth is this is a very natural chat. We do not spend hours mapping out what we're going to say. Normally, Peter and I will say, oh, let's chat about this morning. That's the extent of it. And then we just burble as we're going along. So please be warned.
Yes, yes.
This is basically Peter and Debra burbling and sharing their views on a range of different things. So I hope it works.
Mostly how people dress. So if you want something else, us to talk about something else,
tell us.
Give us a topic and we'll have a go.
Yes.
Yeah. Brilliant. All right. Well, enjoy the rest of the week. Happy long bank holiday weekend. Every week's a bank holiday week for me these days.
Well, enjoy Brussels, Peter.
Thank you. Yeah, will do. We're going
and good luck.
We're going out for an Ethiopian meal on Thursday evening, so I'll let you know how that goes.
Well, I'm off to the 100 with my parents at the Oval on Thursday. Yes, I know you hate it, Peter, but my mother loves it. She watches every single game, men's and women's. So
well,
we'll have to agree to disagree on this.
There are some good Somerset players scattered across the different teams. But there we are. Well, when did you say you're going?
Thursday.
Okay. Yeah. I'll look out for that game. Are you going to the women? Is there a women's game? Are you going to go to the women's game as well?
Of course. Absolutely. Good. We're going to the whole thing. Yeah, 100%.
Good.
Yes.
So, Amanda Jade Wellington. She's character. Plays for Somerset, plays for the Oval Invincibles. Great YouTuber. We'll look out for her.
I will do.
Very good.
Peter,
all right, take care.
Bye, everybody.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.